Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Mid-Curve podcast. It's your weekly look at the markets, both TradFi, DeFi, and the NFT markets. We are a group of traders, investors, general malcontents who spend time, probably way too much time in this space. It's been a semi-bumpy week, but we are in a much different place than we were last weekend when we recorded this, which will be an interesting thing to get into. Let's take a second to introduce ourselves. We are down one member today. Salty may join us in the middle, but we will hopefully hear from him. If we don't, my name is Funky Donk. Also, my real life name is Gavin Purcell. I am a creative / media executive who mostly knows the NFT space pretty well and kind of hangs on for dear life when we get into the TradFi and DeFi talks in the space. Eric, you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, hey guys, it's Eric. I'm my background is TradFi. Been before this I was at institutional finance for about just under 10 years. Now full-time NFT DeFi degenerate, and just overall excited about the space.
Great. Grant, what about you? Want a quick intro?
Hey everyone, my name is Grant. I come from the traditional consulting world. Fell into NFTs almost 2 years ago, and I haven't looked back.
Great. Okay, so we've got quite a bit of stuff to talk about today, but before we start, let's kind of get a sense of kind of one word, how we feel about the markets. Actually, I'm going to go first, and I'm going to go with the word confused, because I have never been kind of more confused in what to do at this time. Now, that said, there are clear indicators that I kind of have read the tea leaves through, knowing, and through both this podcast and other things, starting to kind of understand the TradFi world a little bit. I'm confused only because a week ago we were living in a world where it looked like we were entering financial Armageddon, and then somehow, and I think I understand how, somehow we have now entered a world in which crypto is pretty much skyrocketing. I personally got semi-lucky in that during the great USDC scare, I transferred USDC at about 0.95, thinking that I'll just transfer out because I don't trust this, into ETH. And that turned out to be one of the better trades I think I've made in the last, I don't know how long. So I'm not complaining that crypto is up because I think all of us, are happy to see crypto up. But I will just say I'm confused. Okay. Let's jump over to Grant. Grant, what's your one word for the market this week?
Whiplash, probably.
Yeah.
Like you said, we've got in the span of a week, we've gone from it potentially might be over again for the 12th time this year for crypto and risk assets and whatnot to we're so back, at least for coins.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's an important thing that we'll get into today and figure out how that all kind of plays out. Eric, what about you? What's your one word for the market this week?
I think for me, it's probably Arbitrum, because Arbitrum is the only thing that matters. Arbitrum is all that there is. It's the only thing I fucking care about in the next week is Arbitrum and that ecosystem.
This is maybe a good place to start, but actually let's start first by kind of doing a quick update and kind of tell everybody where we're at. But I do want to get into Arbitrum mostly because I'm really curious to hear how the two of you are going to play it, because I kind of am also just personally curious if there's an idea that, we think buying some of that early on is good. But let's before we get into Arbitrum, because I think that's probably a pretty big conversation, let's just kind of talk about what has happened this week and get a sense on the TradFi side. So, Eric, just to catch us up, let me make sure I kind of have what happened here. I think I have a pretty decent understanding. So, SVB failed last week. The government came in and said we're going to insure the money that's been deposited. So that means that everybody's money is protected. A couple more banks look like they were in bad shape, including all the way to Credit Suisse over the course of the week. But mostly it feels like the contagion has been contained. And there is a sense right now that because these bank failures are happened, that the Fed will either completely stop, or will definitely slow the rate hikes as they've already been doing, maybe stop, but also conceivably cut rates possibly. Eric, can you kind of does that make sense and like kind of give us just the overall sense of kind of where we're sitting right now from a TradFi perspective?
Yeah, so we talked about this last week with Sadie as a guest as well, but in effect what happens is the turmoil within the banking industry is basically one of these canaries in the coal mine that says, hey, the Fed conditions are just way too tight for the existing financial system, and so stuff is starting to break. Right. You had the HCM issue, that I think that took down SVB. When they experienced the bank run, you're now seeing a lot of the U.S. regional banks go under duress. Obviously, Signature aside, which seemed more politically motivated, FRC, which traditionally has been more of like a bank that catered to higher net worth individuals, is also on the ropes. And obviously, you have the nonsense with Credit Suisse. I just want to contextualize that like Credit Suisse belongs to this cohort of like European banks, which these are old story institutions like with like UBS and Deutsche Bank, that they just never fully recovered from the great financial crisis. They operate in markets that are that just graphically speaking, like really shitty headwinds. And so just overall, like the banks have not been healthy for a very, very long time. Like when a small child in India trips over his shoelace and falls over, Credit Suisse has a minor banking crisis. It is so it is literally like to no one's surprise that on the back of the bank run on SCB, Credit Suisse will put its hands up and say, "Oh, by the way, like I have fucking terminal stage 3 lung cancer and it's terminal." Like because this is when they've been a walking zombie. Like all the European banks have been a walking zombie for a long time. They can never be allowed to fail because that would pose way too much systemic risk. They're too deeply entrenched within the financial system. But they like it is like you never want to put money, like unless you are literally a Saudi prince of money to burn. You would never like buying a shitty European bank is like the last thing that you ever want to do. Right. And so now what's happening is there's conversations over the weekend that, hey, like UBS is gonna merge with these guys with a guaranteed backstop from the Swiss government. And so this is basically like you have two drowning people. One of them is grabbing on the other, and then the Swiss National Bank is going to throw them a small life raft in the meantime, so they can kind of float and tread water for a little longer. And that I think for the most part will settle things, but it's really shifted the narrative from, hey, inflation is still rampant, the Fed has to continue tightening, to say, well, like shit's broken.
Right.
And if you look at how much banks tapped from the Fed the Fed facilities, over the course of last week, you basically undid half of the quantitative tightening. So now I think you very much have like a credibility issue where the market's saying like, look, like you can't credibly raise rates and tackle inflation anymore because you're breaking stuff, and you've already said like that once stuff starts to break, you're gonna stop. So we're going to price this 25 basis points or whatever the fuck you're going to do. But the next step is probably going to pause. It's going to be a pause and maybe a rate cut to start loosening financial systems. So by year end, you're going to be cutting instead of tightening, and then we'll have easy money again. And then so the crypto markets, which I think like have started to become a little more forward-looking versus the TradFi markets, are already starting to price and position for that move. And then obviously you have this like, narrative that the Bitcoin maxi Morlocks come up with like every once in a cycle, which is banking institutions are gonna fail, put your money in Bitcoin, yada yada. Like I'm not gonna entertain that because
well, yeah. Can we pause here, because I do want to talk about that bet. I don't know if have you guys been seeing that bet that popped up on Twitter? So let's talk about that, and from a normie perspective, which I always try to make sure that everybody knows, like I'm coming from a financial kind of normie perspective. Again, English major here. Seems pretty crazy, right? I'm trying to remember what the name of the guy. I think it was Jean, let me find out. Let's see if I can find it. But the
Balaji?
bet essentially, yeah, Balaji. Thank you, Balaji.
So to give you a little bit of context of who this guy is, right? So he started one of the larger Bitcoin mining startups in 2016 with A16Z as a backer, mined a fuckload of Bitcoin, was also an executive on Coinbase. So just very, very much like a crypto Bitcoin maximalist.
Yeah, which makes sense. Yeah.
And one of the more prescient things that he did say ahead of when COVID first broke was like, what is it? This is sort of the catalyst that kind of kicks the door open on crypto, decentralized money, and really accelerates this transition to trustless finance. And so he does, like, I think rightfully does get some credit for making that call. But now the bet that he's making is in 90 days, there is effectively going to be widespread catastrophic banking failures. The US dollar is going to enter hyperinflation. Banking institutions will fail, and so Bitcoin will reach $1 million because everyone is going to take their money out of banks and put it into crypto as a safe harbor. So I mean, like, I'm not gonna. The time frame seems honestly a little ridiculous here, but like, I think directionally what he's saying and the bet he's making has very, very much been in line with, I think, one of the core tenet beliefs of crypto and decentralized finance in general. And so, and that in itself is not like without merit, right? It actually, I think, has a lot of merit, and SCB was a good case of it. It's just that moral hazards exist, and it is really pervasive within traditional finance world, where you can have like really incompetent people that are in charge, running a lot of money, put everyone at risk through dumb, stupid fucking decisions, and then the government provides a bailout because the pain of actually having to work through that process in a truly capitalist market is just much higher, has a much higher cost, like, to them politically, has a much higher aggregate cost on society. So the easier solution is to just kind of bail them out, move along, and make sure nobody gets completely rinsed and loses all of their money, right? But that, I think, like, creates a double standard where when everyday normal individuals run into financial hardship, it's like, oh, pull yourself up by your own fucking bootstraps, and they throw like, here's a copy of the Fountainhead and figure it out yourself.
Yeah.
Versus like when every one of these like Ayn Rand humping assholes goes on about like libertarianism, the first whiff of systemic risk, they're like, well, why isn't the government doing anything? Right. I think that that's one of the animal spirits that kind of makes crypto interesting, keeps it alive, and keeps people committed to the cause.
Yeah.
So I don't disagree with that bet. I just would not make it within a 90-day time frame. Like, that I think is like aggressive.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing. Like, I mean, obviously, you always wonder these days how much of this stuff is attention versus real. Like, I think in a lot of ways, what he's trying to do is put his foot down and begin and say, like, look, I've been writing this before. I'm going to be right again. And I think in a lot of ways, like $1 million, something like this probably doesn't mean as much as it does to your average everyday person. But anyway, we've entered into the Bitcoin maxi conversation again, which I think is a big part of what we're getting into this world.
Yeah, that conversation. I mean, I think that conversation near term is fucking stupid for one very simple reason. Is that when you have to pay your mortgage, when you have to pay your bills, when you have to buy food to eat, you're not whipping out your Bitcoin wallet and saying, hey, let me send you this payment. Confirmation is in 30 minutes, right? Like, that's not going to happen. You are still relying on traditional finance rails. And one of the challenges right now is that the traditional finance rails, whether you're looking at Europe, US, or China, is between crypto and between crypto and TradFi, it's still very, very heavily restricted, right? And now we actually don't have much of an off rail.
That's what I was gonna say. Off ramping is hard, right? Like, now it's getting harder and harder to off ramp into fiat.
it's getting much harder. And then in Europe they're trying to push through this bill where taking above like $5,000, taking crypto for small business payments effectively becomes money laundering, and it becomes heavily regulated, right? So there's real world inertia in place that really prevents you from like doing this tomorrow. Like, so my challenge to a lot of like Bitcoin maximalists is like, or like, you're gonna do this, put your money where your mouth is. Try to do everything in your day-to-day living with Bitcoin, see how far that gets you. It's not much difference from just being like debanked in aggregate within the modern finance system. And as we've seen with like communities of colors and other disadvantaged community, other minority communities, when that happens, it creates like a real socioeconomic gap. So just really something to keep in mind.
Yeah, that all makes sense to me, and I think it's a tricky thing to have, like, high level kind of like conversations around what's possible versus something that much more kind of boots on the ground sort of scenario. Grant, I have a question for you, which is, when I saw a post you put in our asylum thread, I think it was yesterday, which was basically you're feeling pretty strong now about the market, but then you feel like, I think you said there's going to be like another dump in May. What is your plan? How are you playing this market right now? And kind of like, what are the kind of like things you're seeing that make you feel better about it versus where you felt like, I mean, obviously a week ago?
Not sure I'm ready to reveal my master plan here to the masses. I'm just kidding. I think Eric's probably right. It's not backstopping these banks doesn't necessarily equate with QE, but we're certainly there. I mean, I think I said last week, like, this is the end game, right? Like, they have to blank here, or stay true to their word that they're going to continue to cause pain. The issue is, as it always is, when so many things in this economy are interconnected, you don't really know which dominoes fall until it might be too late, right? So it looks like they've blinked, and that asset chart from the U.S. government kind of looks like 2019, right? Where they're trying to do QT. They've, like, I think early on enough realized that they've kind of taken the printing a little bit too far, but kind of a similar situation as right now, and that it's a bit it's a bit too late to kind of put the weasel back in the box, right? So the markets have started to freeze up, just like in 2019. The repo market yields jumped a lot because there's just basically a shortage of like cheap USD, right? And that's what we saw with SVB and Credit Suisse, and name your shitty mid-tier bank in the US as well as around the world, right? Like that's what's causing them to kind of implode. So I think everyone's hyperbolizing, like the end of the US dollar, which I don't agree with, but I do think the Fed's going to pivot. It is likely, I think, going to cause a hard landing, regardless of what they do now. And when the reality of recession hits, risk assets usually take another dump. I think that will be probably the bottom that you can comfortably kind of ease into for the next 2 to 3 year cycle. But that's all extremely speculative and not financial advice at all. My opinions are always loosely held, and I change my positions in the blink of an eye.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, it's such an interesting time, right? Because like a week ago there was a conversation around, like, this idea that, gosh, maybe this is where ETH does its full dump, and we finally are gonna, people will be talking about trying to buy in cheap, or getting into stables, and obviously the stables themselves were taking a dump.
Fuck yeah. A week ago, I was buying USDC at 87 cents, wondering why it wasn't going up, and cursing the name Jeremy Allaire in my sleep.
It's a strange thing how time moves fast. Looks like we've been joined by Salty, which is exciting. Hi, Salty.
Hello.
Hello, hello. Well, you want to jump in here real quick? I'm kind of curious. So, just to catch you up, we've obviously been talking about where the market's at and kind of how all over the place it's been. I'm kind of curious from your end, as somebody who I don't want to say you're a Bitcoin maxi, but you've at least been through the Bitcoin maxi life and seen that cycle. Like, where what are you kind of like, how are you playing this market right now? Are you like really diving into a bunch of tokens? We are going to talk about ARB in a bit, so not this is not the ARB conversation necessarily, but like, are you feeling confident that we're going to see a little bit of significant up movement now based on the kind of current conditions?
Well, I have some thoughts from what y'all were saying, because I don't have a full thesis for like everything that's going to play out that would be even remotely as competent as what Grant and Eric are talking about. And I don't have, from my very naive viewpoint, I don't have any like major disagreements with what they're saying. I do I think we were talking about that Balaji bet, the $1
Yep.
million bet. Yeah, so I totally makes sense that he's off on the timelines, but I do think it is worth pointing out that the intervention cycle is accelerating,
Mm.
especially exponential or parabolic acceleration can be very hard for the human brain to predict because we're used to things that are related in a linear fashion.
Look at the AI conversation. I think this is the kind of perfectly translates to what's happening with AI right now too. But sorry to interrupt, but you're right. I think it's something we just don't get until you are in the middle of it.
Yeah, yeah. There's so many things that most people are taught about history, and it's like, and all of a sudden the Bolshevik Revolution happened, or then all of a sudden, hyperinflation happened. It's never that way. It just feels that way because that's what exponential growth feels like. But yeah, I mean the intervention cycle does seem to be accelerating because this was like banks are collapsing on a Friday, it's fixed by Sunday, Monday. So it
Mhm.
didn't used to be that we would develop an entirely new like tool from the Fed to and inject trillions of dollars in a weekend. Like this is so there is something to be said for the intervention is happening more quickly. But yeah, the 90 days seems absurd to me, but and I'd like to be wrong on that. I think we'd all like that not to be the case. That we.
I think I would say, like, if that's the case, I don't think any of us have nearly enough crypto. At least in my, I know that I don't.
If that's the case, there's some large real estate purchases that I really, really need to see if I can undo.
I mean, toilet paper is also going to be worth like $1,000 a pop. So there are bigger problems at play. Toilet paper.
Oh yeah,
Yes.
right. Yeah. None of us want to live that world, but I do. Eric had asked me about there's a protocol called the Y2K where you can take directional bets against stablecoin pegs and stuff. It was something I never messed with because, I'm just not comfortable betting on the end of the world because
Right.
even if you win, you lose. But you should prepare. I don't not listen to people like Balaji. I listen to people like Chris Bleck. I think he has interesting things to say about decentralization and control and like it never hurts to prepare. It probably isn't a great use of your time to be like a prepper type level of paranoia because as Cormac McCarthy said in The Road, even those who were prepared weren't prepared. So because you can't perfectly prepare, but it's good to have diverse assets, to own income streams, to have property, to own cash, maybe to own metals. It's good to be prepared. And like we saw with the USDC DPEG, and Eric was talking about our Ayn Randy and friends, is the week that happened, the number of "life comes at you fast" Twitter posts that were there, which
Yeah.
was screenshots of hundreds of like, these libertarian wannabes posted their like bailouts. You need to take personal responsibility 6 months ago, and then today are like, if the government doesn't bail us out, it's a complete failure of the system. Like,
That's one of the funniest things was what's his name from the All In podcast. I don't think we talked about this. I think David Sachs is his name,
David
right?
Sachs,
That
yeah.
we see, who was like one of the farthest kind of right kind of leaning guys, who like basically now that now that his bags are all kind of at risk, was very much a big like, come on in and kind of bail us out. But I think that's an interesting thing that kind of you see people when suddenly what they do and what they have is at risk, they would like some help. So that doesn't surprise me too much, I guess, in the world that we're in.
you don't want to be on the life comes you fast Twitter stream. So you want to prepare, you want to be judicious, all that stuff.
Yeah.
I would say two other things. That one thing that gives me confidence, and this would be a bigger conversation if this weren't the case. We were talking about fiat off ramps getting more difficult, and there are some challenging things happening in Europe. But at least for retail consumers, fiat off ramping is still pretty darn easy in the U.S. Gemini will always give you $1 for GUSD. Coinbase, Juno for a debit card, dozens of other companies. At least at retail sizes, you can still off ramp into fiat, and that is a really big deal. So if that really started getting clamped down on, that would definitely
And
make
we got a
me.
problem. And we
Yeah,
got
yeah,
a
yeah.
problem.
But is that not kind of what's been like I guess the question I would have is, especially with the Signature Bank situation, and I saw a story, and I don't know how confirmed this is, but there was a conversation. I think it was Signature. There was one of these banks that was basically told if somebody came in and bought it, they would have to kind of eliminate their crypto business. Like
Oh, yeah.
it does
That's
seem like.
corporate, right? That's corporate crypto customers. They're not talking
Is
about
that what it
some
is? Okay, it's
guy.
not about retail. Okay, that's interesting.
On a long enough time frame, if you're kind of completely shutting them off from the rest of society, like yeah, like people will give up eventually.
Yeah.
But you're talking about people who have like seen their assets consistently go to zero every 3 to 4 years, and they come back stronger than ever as long as they survive and don't give up. So in the short term, you're literally fucking around and finding out because your own system is kind of fucked right now.
Yeah.
Very. Yeah, so the one thing, so the it's not good, and it may be heading that direction of cutting people off, but there's almost nothing. Like you said, I've seen everything I own in my private wallets go to zero a number of times. The only thing that would really make me start actually sweating and be like, oh wow, I really need to figure something out, is if they truly or were like writing bills that were like, you cannot make crypto into fiat. We're going to make this like illegal or
Right.
heavily. That would make me a little worried, because like Eric said, I'll wrap it up here. But like Eric said, everyone still needs dollars, whether you're a Bitcoin maxi or not, or dollar equivalents, depending on how you operate. But you need dollars, and that's not going to change maybe anytime soon. Like, you're not going to be able to buy bread and Bitcoin. But I will say, and I pointed this out last week, is that crypto offers a whole bunch of great synthetic dollars, but it offers dollars, the only dollar equivalent in the world that isn't backed by the US's debt or military might is like something like LUSD. It's a dollar equivalent that's backed by something other than US debt. That doesn't exist outside the crypto world. So there's still a lot going on here in a dollarified world that is very worth considering and has a lot of potential value.
And I know it's been almost too popular of a bet to say, the era of US hegemony is over as we know it in the last few years. But, it increasingly seems like the leadership at the top is not doing what's necessary to retain that grasp. And, if you really want to shut down crypto, are you actually betting that no other major nation state in the world is going to pick up
Yeah.
that slack?
Yeah.
Dude, it's nuts to fumble that bag. It's like crypto was handing you even stronger
Yes.
dollar hegemony on a silver platter, and you're just like, no, I don't want it. It's like, I do think the deglobalization argument is there from some of these smart macro people that the world is deglobalizing slowly, and that will accelerate. But yeah, to just throw away the dollar hegemony that crypto could give you.
Well, actually, to expand on that, would you? I'm kind of curious. When you say deglobalization, does that mean that then currencies become much more localized, or what do you mean by that?
I mean, oil. So Eric and Grant can certainly speak better about me than this, but I mean, like, oil is being priced in gold and Bitcoin and Russian currencies, not just dollars, or it will potentially.
Right.
I mean that trade is being limited.
Or the yuan, right? Or the Chinese yuan.
Yeah,
Or
yeah,
yuan?
yeah.
How do you say that? Yuan or yuan? Who can pronounce that for me?
I just call it RMBs.
Okay, RMBs. There you go. RMBs.
I don't know if China's directly buying like Russian oil with RMB or not. So like, yeah, I'll stop so Grant and Eric can say more. But yes, trade is slowing down. People are reshoring production facilities. Everyone's trying to like super tighten up their internal dependence, like self-sufficiency, which is it's why China hasn't done anything like Russia has, because China, it's impossible for them to be self-sufficient right now. I mean, if we cut off their food or oil imports, it would be catastrophic. But these things are happening, right? Like, we had like 60 years of hyper globalization, and now
Yeah.
I think. But again, maybe Eric or Grant can speak more to that.
Yeah, I mean, look at what's happening with semis, right? we've had this, most of the world's
what?
semiconductor, like
Oh, semiconductor.
semiconductors.
Yeah.
Yeah, most of that used to be China is a huge producer of semis, and their expertise in higher complexity semis continue to ramp up. But we're now building, semi fabs stateside, which is something that I think even like 5 or 6 years ago would be never unheard of. But there's real security risks. There's a need to guarantee access to supply to something that is now critical in the AI race. So like broadly speaking, I think one of the fault lines that COVID opened up is that like hey, this globalized supply chain that's just in time is actually kind of fucking dicey when borders shut down. And now with the escalation, I think in the geopolitics antagonism, right? Like regions of the world are starting to re-balkanize. And that means that every region now has to think about self-sufficiency or finding a politically aligned partner to guarantee self-sufficiency, right? So if you do think about China and Russia as adversaries, like, well, fuck, like they contribute massively to obviously one, global commodity balances, and two, just all the cheap shit that you buy and use. So if those are now adversaries and those supply chains are now at risk, like you basically you have to reshore, right? And this also plays into the whole idea of sort of structural inflation, because rethrowing in the short term means more demand for localized labor, which is more expensive. So that strengthens the labor market. It also increases the cost of goods, right? That's inflationary. Like that's not gonna go away overnight. These are very, very sticky things that are probably, like, if this deglobalization continues, are going to stay with us for a long time. Like there's a reason that we hyper globalize for decades before reaching this point, is that it helped everything get cheaper, and in Western nations guaranteed you a much not just Western nations, actually everywhere, guaranteed you an access to a much higher standard of living.
And growth, by the way, and growth. Like we actually grew at an insane rate, right? Because everything was cheaper. We could make things much cheaper. We could focus on other things, and it became like a hyper growth time.
It made the services and tech economy what it is.
Yes,
right? Like
exactly.
that era, because it allowed access to cheap money. So which made it possible for VCs to throw billions of dollars at these, negative cash flow enterprises that needed to be negative cash flow to scale and reach critical mass. And so so all of that now is coming to a head.
My only real advice, and this isn't financial, is I would be most comfortable living in a country that either was or had the potential to be energy and food self-sufficient. And that's a very short list of countries. And the deepest irony is that a ton of Bitcoin maxis, who themselves are mostly de-globalists, because the globalism depends on this fiat currency and all this scummy, perverted systems, move to tax havens to get their Bitcoin profits that are completely dependent on globalism for even remotely any semblance of life. So you got these dudes living on tiny islands with no food, no water, no oil naturally on them, who might be in trouble as we deglobalize and they have all this Bitcoin but need to eat.
Sounds like a great idea for a DAO this upcoming cycle. Just terraform a small island, throw in some energy, plant some crops, and we're good. Good for next cycle.
Wait, is this not Link's DAO?
Yeah, there's a golf course. There's definitely a golf course there too.
Pretty much, yeah. We just need to install some new leadership there. We'll be good.
It's Links DAO, but for grocery stores, because you're hungry.
You and 10 other people get access to this grocery store every hour. Okay. Let's move on. I had one last thing I wanted to say about this. Which is just that one of the things that comes up in this conversation, obviously, is the idea of energy a lot, right? Because energy has been dependent on oil and natural resources. And I do want to say there is interesting conversations that I think are happening, and these are completely speculative. But obviously, before we jumped on here, we were talking about what's been going on in AI and how much like the front end of GPT-4 and ChatGPT has kind of exposed that to people. But the thing that human beings, not Americans per se, but Americans sure, but the human beings in general have done is figured out weird and interesting ways to evolve both intellectually and invention wise to create things. And one thing that would be a massive upgrade to the entire world is some form of cheap energy, right? And like it's the idea that like we have this thing that is growing at an exponential rate. When I say this thing, I mean like the idea of what artificial intelligence has kind of played out and is becoming. And I personally do believe this is like it's hard to be hyperbolic about like what's going on in that space. And it's obviously there's people who are saying that then tomorrow it's going to be the Borg is here and blah blah blah. That's not going to happen. But like the amount of discoveries that can be found out, like there's a world in which 10 years from now we have solved the energy world in some sort of very cheap way, and that all of our world economy is completely different because of what we've figured out. And that's the part that's the most chaotic to me is like we were entering this time where the world at large is in crisis economically, but it's also maybe this is just maybe there's a shift coming that we completely change the way the world economy is based, and that's where it's like it's almost like very hard to project into the future, right? Because like as one of you said, I think change seems to be happening much faster, and the cycles of everything are happening much faster. So it will be really interesting to see, what are we in 2023, like what 2030 looks like, because I have no idea. I have no idea what's going to happen.
I don't think you need to worry about that if you're in the US, because the government will just ban it.
That's also true, right? Well, it'll be like Laos. We'll all live in Laos because Laos will be the only place that allows for a free AI use, for all we know. Okay, well, let's move on to something that's like a little bit more topical, much more topical.
Lao?
Is it Laos, right? The country Laos.
One of the few monarchical communist dictatorships left in the world is going to be the free AI place.
Who knows? I picked Laos because I was like, I've always wanted to go to Laos. That was like one of my dream countries to go visit, and I never got to go there because Vietnam is very cool and it's right next door. I didn't get to go, but anyway, that was a random. Okay. I'll pick another country. Let's pick another country. Kenya. We'll pick another country. Just kind of randomly pick a country across the world. Okay. Anyway, let's switch over to something that is much more forthcoming. I think something that's got people in the crypto world pretty excited, which is the Arbitrum drop happening this week, I think, right? What day does it happen on?
The world's imploding. Let's talk about our internet magic beans.
Thursday. Yeah, exactly. Let's talk more about it. It's on Thursday. Let's talk about the magic beans that are coming and what it means. I think the one thing I want to get into, so again, as somebody who mostly spent my time on Arb kind of screwing around, but mostly in the NFT ecosystem, I got a small little airdrop of, not nothing, 2,500, but like not as much as other people got. But what is this? People are kind of excited about this, right? Like now the Blur airdrop, obviously we were all kind of like directly involved in the NFT ecosystem, so we understand. But like, why are people more excited about the Arb airdrop than others? Grant, do you have a take on that? Like, what is it about Arb that's got people kind of chatting?
Well, I think just macro perspective, it kind of redefines the race for what's going to be the chain, the side chain or alter, whatever the heck you want to call it, on ETH that is actually going to be used by the masses. Because I'm personally a little bit upset that they didn't reward people who like attended their AMAs and did all the Twitter Odyssey bullshit. But nonetheless, like Arbitrum had real users last cycle, right? Magic, Nova, whatever else you want to call it. Like they had like real, it's such a cliche word, but like communities and a thriving ecosystem, all things considered, right? And if I'm OP or Polygon or whoever else, I'm working myself up into a little bit of a lather here because that race just got real, right? And I think it's also just coming at kind of the perfect time, right? Like if this had dropped last Thursday, price would be it would have gone to zero and probably rebounded a little bit. But this is just, everyone's kind of probably a little bit overly optimistic, but just high on hopium of, Fed pivot and whatnot. And we have Bitcoin up, what is it, like 60% from the start of the year or 40% from the start of the year. So it's just kind of a perfect storm of everything coming together.
And what I would ask about this, so you talk about ARB being used. So actually, here's a question I have for somebody that hasn't followed it super closely. Why did it take so long to have an ARB token come out versus say something like the Poly token, the Polygon's token Matic, which has been out for a long time? Like, does anybody know the answer to this? Like, did they wait on purpose? Like, what was the purpose in like taking a while before dropping this token?
I think it's twofold. So one, Arbitrum didn't really need a token to incentivize usage. It was, as far as the existing layer twos, the only layer two worth a shit, because Polygon, I think, has a great business development effort, but their tech stack is still very limited. Does not handle load very well. Optimism using it is almost all of the usage has been heavily token incentivized. And actually using Optimism, if anybody has spent significant time on it, is painful. It is literally, you are literally being interrogated for information that you do not have when you submit to the Optimism user experience. And so ARB has never never really had to deal with any of that, because it was a very functional product from day one. With Nitro, they significantly improved underlying scalability. And so Sans token, you built a chain that, economically speaking, transacts the same volume as Binance Smart Chain, and has about, almost 2x the TVL of the other chains. That TVL is very, very productive. So they just, the easy answer is they really didn't need it. I think that the more complex answer is that off-chain labs is kind of like it's a very complex entity, and it seems like they've structured it similar to the Uniswap DAO and Uniswap Labs, which obviously like operates and develops for the Uniswap protocol. And so I think that process of actually like legally creating this decentralized entity, especially for off-chain labs, which, most recently I think like raised that probably near what rumors were they were closing around at near decacorn valuations, is difficult. And so it's a process, which I think is why it really took them a while to roll out this token, even though a lot of us had been waiting for this since Jesus, like February of last year. When I think like Optimism, around the time that Optimism first hit, like the natural answer was when Arbitrum.
Right.
I think like there's quite a little bit of hopium, but I will just say, when you look at the productivity on the chain, when you look at what's being built on it, protocols like GMX, protocols like Radiant, ecosystems like Magic, and Trove, like they are very, very much starting to position themselves as sort of like this economic, the finance center of ETH. So if you look at a lot of the products that have gained scalability there, and found a use case like a product market fit, they're really setting themselves up to be like the Jane Street and the Wall Street of crypto,
Right.
of like layer twos, and that is very, very compelling.
Okay, so let's talk about the idea of a little bit about how y'all are thinking of this for this week, because I think that there's a lot of hopium about this token, that like it's gonna explode in value, that people are pretty excited. I mean, I don't know, Salty, how are you looking at this? Are you gonna, obviously no financial advice. This is not a financial advice podcast, but Salty, are you planning on jumping into this token? Are you going to try to think about getting some right away?
Yeah, well, I think all of us are probably on this podcast are eligible for the airdrop, so we'll be owners of it in that sense, and I'm sure plenty of us are going to look for good entry prices to get more. So, all of this conversation with that in mind, that certainly many people at Midcurve own or will own lots of ARB. No, I don't. There's a few things. There's three things that I'm just like. It's hard for me to know what the ceiling is here. It's that ARB has a great product, and it's only getting better. The tech stack is just phenomenal. The team is phenomenal. The folks doing their I don't know what you call it, the social sciences thing. You know, the non-tech people are also phenomenal. They're Gavin Purcells they have over there are
Wow,
really
that's really
good.
saying something. Yeah.
And they did all of what they've done so far without even needing a token, which, you know, is a bit of a crutch because you say, hey, here's my token, and now you have a bunch of money and you can blow it on stuff, like incentivizing people who don't actually want to be on your chain to be there.
That's I would push back on that a
What's
little
that?
bit because they did the whole Odyssey like online campaign all of last summer. So not all of it is as organic as some people might make it up to be.
Oh, but Odyssey lasted like 3 or 4 days, and then they shuttered it and said, wait, we're not doing this.
It was a lot longer than 3 to 4 days, if memory
Wait,
serves.
really?
It was yeah, it was Odyssey was for a while, and then they ran into, because so many people were doing it. Arb actually had congestion issues, and they're like, well, no, we're gonna pause the Odyssey until we roll out Nitro, and then they restarted it when Nitro came out, but that was like that was almost like a 2-month process.
They restart? I thought they never did restart it.
They restarted part of Odyssey, but they never fully restarted, I think, the entire chain. And so I think the idea originally was to use Odyssey as this bootstrap event to lead into a token, but it just
Yeah.
they had to sideline it because of the infrastructure upgrade. I think they just lost a ton of momentum and just said, fuck it, or we're not doing it anymore. And so, you know, a lot of that activity was kind of for naught. So Grant's not wrong in the sense that all of us have been using this fucking chain with the expectation in the back of our mind that one day there would be a token and it would be free money. Like that is a very fair criticism. I think my counterpoint to that is that when I look at product on Arbitrum, especially, you know, protocols like GMX, it's independent of that. I think like those products have found like a real use case, and they have been able to build like very sticky user bases as a result.
Yeah, I never minted smalls or played bridge rolled with the idea that, you know, there's going to be an airdrop 2 years later, actually. So like macro level, I completely agree. Like I like their chances against release products as well as, you know, future products like ZK Sync. It's just, you know, let's be honest here in that like pre-airdrop activity is never as organic as it seems, especially with 50K, you know, real users on the whole chain.
No one's in it for just the tech. We're all in here for the free money.
But it is really good tech. It works so much better than the other L2s, like we've said.
Yeah, I can't disagree there.
It's amazing tech, and so I kind of, when I look at, you know, when I look at some of the mid-tweet predictions on price, and they're comping it to Polygon optimism, and they're just doing the dumb TVL math. Like I kind of get a little annoyed because TVL is only one metric. TVL is dynamic. When a chain hits critical scale, you know, TVL, or when a chain loses its incentive mechanism, TVL can go up and down.
Very
And
quickly.
and then like what is that TVL for? Is it actually transacting on chain, right? Like Tron has like $5 billion of TVL, but if you look at like the activity that actually goes on there, right? You understand like why that chain is where it is. So like, you know, so you have to, I think, like consider like economic value. You have to consider TVL, because like what are you gonna fucking do next week when this token comes out and it trades above your target and you're like, oh, it's expensive, but the TVL from Polygon and Optimism might start migrating to Arbitrum. So on like a TVL metric basis, Arbitrum actually looks more reasonably priced with those versus those two tokens that are bleeding TVL and are starting to trade at a higher multiple on their FDV versus TVL. Like this is all like, it's all dynamic, right? So you have to kind of read like my whole thing going into next week is like there's a lot of anticipation. You have to look at like what the underlying math and activity is telling you, because dude, like if Arbitrum TVL and volumes continue to migrate higher post this airdrop, and a lot of that is organic because there's real products people want to use, you may take umbrage of buying it at like $2 this week, but you might not in like 6 months or a year. So there
Yeah.
is like these considerations that you really have to think about, and you have to like, you can't be dogmatic on this shit. Like it's just, else you either gonna end up with massive cope, or you're gonna get a fucking wreck.
Definitely happens.
Yeah, I like that you know bringing up TVL and these ratios because the other two pieces of this, we saw an airdrop recently that I think did some of these things right, and it starts with a B, which is that so you have great tech, it's really useful, and people actually want to use it. Yes, also I do agree there's some incentivization and potential and hopium going on, but it's nothing like what some of these other chains are doing to incentivize use. So you have great tech. Then the other thing you do is you make people rich. If you make them rich, they'll love you and they'll support you and they'll do anything. You know, I've said this before, this is what Looks did wrong, and part of what Blur did right is Looks gave so much of their stack to influencers and whatever advisors. I don't know what they called their own investors. And Blur is going to make people, or I'm sorry, Blur also. So Blur gave a lot of money to people. That breeds a lot of loyalty. If you make people who use your product rich, they're gonna go to bat for you. You know, so Arb is gonna make a lot of people will insta dump whatever. It's gonna make people. It's really gonna reward people for using the chain, and that matters. And then the third thing is like people are talking about prices on this, and even TVL for as a metric, really talking about it kind of like it's a protocol. It's like go look at Coin Market Cap or something. Well, this is not a protocol like a DeFi coin. This is an entire blockchain, you know, with lots of use. It's very easy to use.
It's a fucking ecosystem. Like as a
Yeah,
It's
business, it's
huge.
already
Yeah.
you're already talking about like hundreds of millions of dollars that off chain is gonna earn from sequencer fees, right? It's
Oh
just
yeah.
like the economic, like this is a core piece of like DeFi like infrastructure, right? And so when you comp it to Sol, when you comp it to Aptos, when you comp it to any of the other these chains, like like are you really just gonna strictly comp it to like L2s? Like what is thematically speaking or economically speaking special about a L2 versus a side chain? Like, like why aren't these, you have to ask these questions. And so, but again, like look, this is, we're maybe like mid-curving this too much. Like, and at the end of the day, it's just animal spirits and instinct that kind of drop in near-term price action.
It could instantly launch and go to 20 cents. So if it does, nobody complain to us.
yeah.
Please send it to 20 cents. Please send it to
Yes.
20 cents.
I'll be
Right.
I will
buying.
buy I will buy it with every dollar that I have, and like and just not look at it for like 5 years.
20 cents is my target on USDC last weekend too.
20 cents was?
Well, I bought so much USDC on Bybit that Bybit, when I pressed the button to buy more, Bybit said no because I was at the risk of bringing systemic risk to their funding pools on USDC.
I think directionally we're all like aligned here. I
Yeah.
just, like loyalty to, a protocol or product, even if it's the B word salty, I would say it's going a step too far. But I think generally we're all a fan of the A coin. Let's just say
Yeah. A and B. We have A coin and B coin now. What's going to be C coin? That's my next question.
that. Well, C coin we've already talked about. Come on now.
Yeah.
I'm not saying look you should be loyal or something like that, or I'm just saying it's a phenomena that happens that when you make people rich they stick around, and sometimes they stick around way too long. So an example of this on Arbitrum is
Magic.
Is Magic. Yeah, that
Yeah.
community became huge, fully memeified, developed its own egregores, and people were like small PFPs everywhere. You know, everybody and many of us, myself included, held on too long because when somebody dumps you some significant chunk of cash, you know, you're like, yeah, I'm gonna let's keep playing this game. I just got a bunch of cash. I want more.
Yeah, if you think about it this way, the Arbitrum airdrop is basically like a relief payment for all of us the Magic ecosystem.
Yeah, exactly.
Relief payment for hanging on to Bridge World months after the game launched.
Yeah.
Relief payment for hanging on despite the multi-million-dollar hack of Smalls.
Relief payment for saying, John Pattern, who I think is one of the best people in crypto, is the next Steve Jobs and visionary of the
Right.
space.
So people say that when you make them rich. If you give somebody a 15 grand airdrop, they'll say things like that.
Yeah. Look,
Yeah.
if you gave somebody a JPEG that they had to draw a picture on paper for, and that JPEG goes to $50,000 at peak, I get it.
Well, what I was gonna say, the funny thing about the Magic ecosystem is, yes, all of us were, a lot of us were in Smalls or Ridge World, but like the real winners are the people that were there originally when Magic dropped the first time, right? Because that itself was a nice little chunk of change that helped people out. And those people, if you stuck around since then, I'm sorry. You know what I mean? Like those people have been around for a very long time.
In retrospect, the first question we should have asked was, which one of you staked Magic for a year?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, this is great. Arbitrum is going to be coming on Thursday. Definitely something to watch.
Real quick, so Grant was saying we all are probably of a similar mind directionally. Was there a follow-up or a but to that, Grant? I thought you were gonna there was a hedge.
No hedge. I just, I'm sensing a little bit of euphoria, not from this group necessarily. And they deserve a ton of credit, but I just don't think the whole execution was as clean as some people might make it out to be in the broadest of strokes. And when it comes down to it, brutally speaking, it's just timing. Like look at the supposed blue chips on ETH L1 in NFT land and what they're doing. Like the ones that haven't had their floors slotted by 50%, the ones that are doing nothing, like absolutely nothing.
So two things on that, Grant. Like one, I agree with you. I think some of these calls for like $10, I just look at them and say, like, really, this is gonna be worth 2x Stripe on the last round. I love art, but I don't know if I would go there.
I'm actively retweeting all of those tweets because I want extra liquidity.
Yeah, please do. Can you wait till after I buy on airdrop day though? Just please wait for 7 days, and then. I think the other thing, I wanted to get into this is apparently you can launch an NFT project, take in hundreds of millions of dollars, and one day just say we're not an NFT project anymore.
Yes, well, that's what I want to get into. This is my next step, is to talk about the NFT market kind of as a whole, but really I think it's kind of looking at the three major projects that people have kind of like pieced together, which are Doodles, CloneX, and Moonbirds, which have all kind of struggled in a similar way, right? Like when I say that, we can start with Poopy's tweet, but I think that this is like something I've been hammering on in this podcast for quite a while, which is all three of these projects seem to have struggled, A, with communication, but B, with execution, and so yeah, let's get into this. So. Poopy, one of the Doodles co-founders, basically came out and wrote a tweet that said, we are not an NFT project, we are a media brand. And I think it rightly was interpreted as a kind of a fuck you to the haters of the Doodles project, but also to me kind of belied a very telltale sort of communication style, but also like the word was probably the word, a not understanding of what business these people are in, right? Like a not understanding of like how the markets work, what's happening, how it goes. So yeah, let's talk about Doodles, right? So it's funny. I was just looking at the Blur. There's a project that launched yesterday that's called Not an NFT Project, which is a Doodles derivative that is doing okay for a complete derivative project, but it has become a meme, this thing. Eric, yeah, what's your take on essentially the tweet, but more so like kind of maybe where a projects like Doodles, CloneX, or Moonbirds kind of goes from here?
I mean, so I'll put those into like kind of three different buckets. I think like the issue with Doodles is great IP, fucking terrible team, and they've completely taken their holders, original holders for granted, and just said like, well, like we're not doing this anymore because we're not very good at it, so we're gonna pivot into we're gonna quote unquote media. And just like like floor it and get the fuck out. I think like now the rightfully catching a lot of flack for it because this is the number one golden rule in NFTs is like you have to treat your collector base well. And the guys that have mastered this, like Yuga and Azukis, have had durability for that very fact, because they continue to treat their holders with, like, respect their holders, or at least just not outright rinse them, while the other projects didn't, right? And so we can talk like the same thing with Artifact. Is Artifact took the, use their holders as marks and try to extract value and liquidity from them, right? And now you're coming to a head where, like, it's just very, very sensitive. And you look at the last round of forging, none of the things look as good as they were promised in the renders. Like that, the vests look like, what I would call like crossing guard chic, right? And it just feels like the age old like bait and switch that you expect from lesser projects, not ones backed by Nike. And then, Moonbirds, I think we talked about this before. I think just like executionally, like they did not have a strong point of view on what Moonbirds actually fucking were. I don't think, honestly, I think there is a timeline where Proof as an ecosystem would have been much better off if it just stayed a 1,000 collection and Moonbirds didn't exist. But Kevin wanted to build a business and he wanted like real Silicon Valley money, and so he had to grow it. But now I think, like, I think they have like an understanding of the mission, which is we're an art-focused project community, which I absolutely agree with, and everything they do art-wise is awesome. But I also think there is like an inherent challenge towards like building a community that's 10,000 strong, that's art-focused right now in the current market that we're in, and really making it sustainable, which is maybe like one of the reasons that they tried to do other things in the first place. But obviously the delivery and execution has been off there. And so like it just, it kind of is just these transitory pains of an NFT project going from like massive hype cycle, getting a lot of money, and now having to both operate as like a going concern business, with their own motivations, but also juggling like, the need to really like maintain a good functional relationship with that core community. And what you're seeing right now is these former blue chips really struggling with the latter, right?
Yeah.
And it's just bad optics, and it slows momentum on the business. Like the socks, come on.
The socks thing, by the way, is another crazy thing that I don't understand. I mean, obviously, I will say, as somebody who like,
do like people in Web3 just have like massive foot fetish?
Yeah.
This is like the third sock based like NFT project that we fucking seen in this.
Well, and this is even worse because it feels like, the whole thing was about these virtual socks, right? Like I guess I think this is where I think we are finally coming to the fruition of like what NFTs tried to be, and kind of like we've kind of like come to the emperor's clothes here, right? Like this idea that like that certain projects kind of figured out a way to like actually make something out of them, and other projects are still kind of struggling to understand what they are. And even like the argument that like Doodles is a media project, I would go as far as to say, as somebody who's worked in media, is like, if you're a media project and you've now been in existence for a year and a half, what media have you created? And what can you point me to that you're a media project? And you had a year and a half. Media is not video games, right? Media is not video games. As somebody who's made media, I know that sure, animation is expensive, but in the time that you had, the amount of money that you had, all the stuff you had, there are many different pathways you could have taken to make yourself to do stuff. And that's like, people point to the Pharrell partnership, but like, as far as I can tell, nothing has come from that. Like I just think that the interesting thing is you had three people, Burnt Toast and Poopy and I think Evan is the other guy, who like had a very cool idea for an interesting looking NFT, and I think built a really interesting visual brand, and then kind of ever since that point have fumbled the bag, right? And I don't mean that in a way of like financially. I just mean of as a business, like every step along the way seems to have been making the wrong choice. And it's funny, one of the things I do want to talk about Doodles specifically is I'm sure y'all remember Space Doodles, right? And Space Doodles was like this kind of interesting, innovative idea of like wrapping a token rather than doing an airdrop. And I think they got a lot of, positive sentiment around the idea of you're not diluting the project. But in a lot of ways, that was like the kind of beginning of like, oh, what are these guys? What is this thing? Why? What does Space Doodles mean for Doodles, and how is this connected? And since then, it's just been like a continual kind of progression to like it's like these people just don't know what they're doing, right? I mean, I don't know, Grant, you've had a lot of time to think about the Doodles project. Like, are they just lost completely, and we should be writing them off at this point? What's your take on it?
First of all, I would like to say I don't appreciate the unwarranted attacks on another man's fetishes. Secondly, I mean, I smelled a rat, honestly, the minute they ran that Miami event. And at that time, the Doodle Bank was supposed to be decentralized, as in you're supposed to vote on shit before you spend money on it. And they put every team member up in like a 5-star hotel that ended up costing like 5 figures for the entire weekend. And I smelled the rat because like that's not how it's supposed to run. That's not how it's supposed to work. And ever since then, it's just been a hilarious kind of series of unfortunate events when it comes to honestly communications, right? Like the rocket thing didn't dilute your holder base, but then you drop duplicators and did the ridiculous auction for boxes, and you didn't explain what it was for, except
and you
that
put it all on the
closed.
flow chain. You put it all on
Yes.
the flow chain, the
Yes.
Fed chain.
Yeah, which I mean, just again, does nothing to dispel rumors that it's just a giant circle jerk of ex-Roham footlookers.
Yeah.
Right? So it's never never say never in the crypto world, but I've never really had much interest in them. And if you're such a media project, how come Pudgy Penguins has all these like GIFs that have like
Exactly.
hundreds and thousands of uses and you don't, right?
Yeah.
Like what are we talking about here? Of the three, I actually think Moonbirds, not necessarily Moonbirds, but like Proof has like a better chance of recovery, I'll say. Like I think the OG community from Doodles and Artifact has been just completely purged. And Artifact is just victim to, not victim, but because a large part of their success comes from that as well, but just victim to whatever the corporate overlords at Nike are making them do in terms of revenue generation and whatever else in the short term. But Proof, in another world, it could have just been literally a couple hundred coastal elites pumping and dumping generative art. And that's truly what Kevin Rose was in the ecosystem before starting his own project, right? He just got too greedy or, too high on his own hopium and said, let's do these PFPs. And he just completely overestimated his own ability to manage expectations of degens.
And by the way, he was great at it. If this had stayed an art collective,
he was really fucking good at it. He was a lead at pumping art.
Yeah. Which, this would probably be one of the most desirable collectives still within the space, despite everything that's happened. And he has amazing first-tier relationships with some of the best artists in the space. I think the struggle with Moonbirds is that how do you go to Tyler Hobbs and say, like, can you do a 10K collection for me? Like, no sane artist, I think, in the medium, given the size it is, would agree to that. And so there is like, I think the real big challenge for them is like, fuck, like how do I do this and make it accessible to my 10,000 holders?
Yeah.
Right. It doesn't and that's where it doesn't like completely feel like this 2-tiered system, where like the proof holders are still like get everything and then Moonbirds back for scraps. And that's not easy. So like, but at least like, like when you go into the Moonbird holders, like the day one holders, the guys like Lacoste, like those guys are still there, right? You can't really say that, but as Grant like alluded to, like the big Clone X holders and the big Doodles holders have mostly speaking just said fuck this, I'm over it. And so that puts those I think projects in a different spot. I will say out of the three, I think I actually will pick Clones as the one that has the highest chance of making a comeback, just because they're sitting behind the Nike engine, which has infinite money, and a huge deep well of talent in terms of creating stuff that people will want, hyping, marketing it, and just generally like creating this halo effect for their stuff.
Yeah, well, here's the thing I'll say about that, because I agree with you, but also the question I would have is, and Grant, this is actually to your point too, because I'm not sure if it's the Nike corporate overlords telling them what they should be doing, or if it's they were brought in and then like kind of like allowed to continue to manage it themselves. Because like if I'm looking at CloneX from a business perspective and kind of like what they shipped in terms of all their stuff, like it doesn't look great, right? Like, and this is the kind of thing where if you're dealing with an internal, if you're at a giant corporation, you're dealing with an internal division that's failing. Like this is a candidate for like, okay, we need new leadership at that division, right? So I think there's a world in which if Nike kind of like understood the possibilities here, they like either sunset the founders and move them into something else, or it's a scenario where like a startup gets bought by a large company and then the founders, move on to something else as they find ways to make the product better. Now, a lot of times it doesn't work either, right? Like a lot of times corporations will screw up startups along the way.
Yeah. Have you seen the price action of the Adidas NFTs?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. So like, I think that's not that much better there, right? Is that what you're just like, was that what you're getting to?
No, like are you betting that Nike leadership has a better idea of what to do than the Artifact founders? I just
Well,
I don't see
think
it.
the Nike leadership view the Artifact founders as have not having worked out, because they probably hit every revenue KPI that they were supposed to hit when they bought Artifacts, right? And
Right,
that actually is the core issue, is that the incentives, and people, a lot of people have kind of talked about this. It's like the incentive structure at Artifact probably encouraged the founders to do this, because
Right.
to get their massive payout, like you have to hit certain royalty targets, you have to do all these things to create speculation and build up hype. And that partially put the project to where it is. Like Monolith 2, I think, was the breaking point where they allowed their holder base to speculate $150 coupon to $6,000 and said nothing.
Well, but here's my question about that. So okay, there's two questions about that specifically. Like, whose fault is that? Is that the founder's fault for saying, hey, we're going to do this thing even though we know this is going to result in this thing? Or is it the corporation's fault because they said, hey, we're not going to give you these shoes for free, they're only a coupon? Like this is where I think we have to like hold founders accountable somewhat in this situation, because like that is probably the largest like original, that's like not the original sin, there are probably other sins, but like that was the breaking point for the CloneX whales, right? I feel like this idea that they got a coupon for purchasing these shoes. Like I think the biggest question I would have is like whose fault does that lie with? Like who made that?
It's everyone's fault. Yeah, it is the founder's fault for not putting their economic incentive first in the short term, and basically shortchanging the entire community and the business that they built by saying like, like I know this is $150 coupon, but I'm not really gonna say anything because I gotta hit my KPIs to get my earnout, right? Like that's absolutely their responsibility, and you have to hold them accountable for it. But it is also, I think it goes to like everything is an economic incentive. Right. Like so what they're doing, is like in the face of money, human beings are very brittle constructs, morally speaking. It is what it is. And so there is also I think some Nike rightfully deserves a lot of flack for not actually understand the medium that they bought or invested in. And I think that in itself is also like creating a lot of that itself is also something that like a lot of these Web2 brands getting into the space have to learn and understand, which is like you can't just use this as a source to continuously extract value from this holder base. Like you have to grow it and nurture it, because it is a seedling right now, and you have to let it germinate and be able to grow into something of real size. Else
Yes.
you're really just shortchanging yourself in the long run.
Well, it's interesting to think about the to show what Azuki has done during this time, which I think a lot of people have talked about the fact that like Azuki hasn't dropped a lot of new stuff since Beans, and it's been a while now, right? And like the idea of like kind of letting the market, communicating, but also letting the market kind of play out as we go along, rather than completely diluting to try to get all your money back, immediately is an interesting thing. The KPI thing is an interesting conversation because like it does get to the point of like the original model for what NFTs were probably is not in any sort of way a reasonable model to look at a business. And, especially when, the royalty conversation, I think notwithstanding it's not really worth even jumping in here, but more of just the idea of, creating new collections and letting them go. I will say like Yuga seems to have done it okay. Now, granted, their projects are top of market and they've found a way to kind of like get into many different businesses, it seems like, specifically like games and then other things as well. I guess my ultimate question would be and we've been here a couple times before, is that we had, of those 3 projects we just talked about, all 3 of them, Clones, Moonbirds, and Doodles, were all kind of considered, if not blue chips, semi blue chips a year ago. And I would kind of pretty much succinctly put all of them kind of not on that list anymore. Do we feel like the idea of like a blue chip NFT is just going to be a much rarer thing than we ever expected? And do we feel like, I guess my other question with this is, do we feel like there is the possibility of blue chip NFTs to come? This is something else I think is interesting to talk about.
So I think it's just a way for people who are not smart or not attentive to the market to label certain things. Not to mention there's like literal indices on Nansen and elsewhere that mark certain collections as blue chips. So I think that term will always exist. I just don't use it personally for anything other than communicating to normies, I guess. I think it's actually super bullish for another collection that I actually have personal distaste for, but I think will do well financially speaking, and that's D-Gods and Utes. I consider Frank like basically the Dave Portnoy of NFTs, where I want nothing to do with Barstool or Barstool affiliated people. But in an attention economy, you can't deny the number of eyes and ears that he has on him, right? And
right.
For normies, it's not going to be about the details. It's going to be about the headlines. Like, he's young, he's ambitious, he's loud, he's XYZ, blah, 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 blah. And we saw that really come to light. Like, they actually did a number on Yuga on the Ordinals front, right? Because they didn't go max greed with their collection. They actually cut the min price, and it sold out in a single block.
Yeah.
And it's doing really well in secondary right now. So I think with the supposed death of the 3 collections we talked about, it's quite bullish for newer projects that a bunch of ETH people don't know, like the dirty details behind. And it's also optimistic for older collections and kind of the 2 ETH to 5 ETH range that have just been, haven't really engaged in dilution and haven't like absolutely butchered their PR and communication strategy.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. All right, we should look to wrap up here. Before we go, we always want to get one word, or not one word. So I always want to hear one thing people are looking forward to this week. I think obviously ARB is something all of us are interested in, looking forward to. I'm actually really interested. I'll do mine first. I'm actually kind of interested to see how the ARB drop affects other ARB ecosystem type things, whether that's Magic or other ARB tokens. So I'll be kind of watching that aspect of what's happening. I kind of feel like the NFT space is going to be on pause for a bit, but who knows? We'll see. Grant, what about you? What are you looking forward to this week?
Yeah, just I think there's no need to mid-curve it. The play of the week is undoubtedly going to be ARB. If you're interested in playing other alts and narratives, I would consider looking at anything, any ticker with AI in it, with literally just the 2 letters AI in it, and then China coins, because fundamentally they're on a different track than the U.S. economy.
I do want to say that the tokens that have AI in them, as somebody who's done a fair amount of AI research and work on my own in terms of that stuff. So many of them, it's fascinating. Like it just becomes a question of like, how do you use a narrative to kind of pump something? Because so many of them are basically using off the shelf product to kind of prove that they have a product. And it's the simplest, dumbest thing, but
You're being too kind.
Yes.
Funky. They're all outright scams.
They really are. They really are. It's really shocking. Like there was that, Imagine.ai was like a really big like token that like really went crazy in January and early February. And essentially was their product was a front end that allowed you to access, a stable diffusion fork, which is just like the craziest thing in the world. And the only product was like they were going to pay for compute for you, which is like, I guess something, but anyway, it's a fascinating thing to watch. Okay, great. Salty, what are you looking forward to this week?
Well, of course, I'm looking forward to, we're going to release this podcast and then we'll release an AMA that Eric and I did with the Timeless Finance folks. So that's all I have to look forward to, is more of hearing myself talk.
That's always a fun thing.
No, I mean, it's ARB season, it's alt season, it's I don't know, things will go up and then they might go down and then hopefully they'll go up again over some time frame.
There you go.
I do think it's a good time to like, just like think about what you think the future holds, think about the markets. It's good sometimes to not totally dismiss what sound like extreme voices about the value of Bitcoin or the ease of retail using crypto in the US or the developments of AI, So I mean that's kind of what's been on my mind is and I think it should be because, we got bailed out, but still something happened last week. It's like it's fine now, probably it like in the immediate term, but still that thing happened. It did not happen. It's just that we fixed it in time. So it's worth just thinking about where you have your money, what you want it to be in.
Yep. You basically are saying think about the bunker.
Think about making sure you live in a country that's energy and food self-sufficient if need be.
There you go.
How about
there you
that?
go. Make sure you're not on an island. All right, Eric, what are you looking forward to this week?
I mean, I think the other thing we didn't talk about the next week will be FOMEC. So I'm really looking at the commentary there. For the most part, I think people have baked in like a 25 basis point increase, which I don't really have a strong view on. But I think the commentary around whether there are going to be more increases to come or whether they're in wait and see mode. If we do want to have the sustained run, especially in alts, I think that will be like confirmation for people to go nuts. If Jerome Powell comes out and says like, hey, like, we tightened quite a bit. We're gonna just wait a little bit and evaluate rate hikes on pause for now, and then we're fucking off to the races.
Right.
Like and then like every CT personality is gonna just be fist bumping and then calling for like $100,000 BTC or whatever. So that I think like in conjunction with like what is going to be probably like a $1 to $2 billion stimulus check to the crypto community next week from ARB, is going to set up some really interesting dynamics.
Yep, that makes perfect sense. I think that I'm super curious to see two things with that. One, I think you're right. It'll be fascinating if they do pause and don't raise. Like I think there's going to be a crazy frenzy. The bigger then question becomes is like, okay, I've seen some people say this is like, we go back to the cycles happening faster. Like, do we suddenly hop into a true bull cycle that lasts 6 months? Do you know what I mean? Versus lasting whatever a true bull cycle in the past has lasted like a year and a half, 2 years. Like it seems like we're entering that kind of period.
Yeah, I mean, it's still a very interesting conundrum because inflation can still be quite elevated, but you're at this point where like tightening is going to be a lot really painful and disruptive to core institutions. So like, what do you do, right? Yep. It is a little bit of no man's land, and that's like I think like post the initial euphoria, that's probably when some of these like 1980 comparisons, lost decade comparisons are going to start to come up again, and we'll just deal with it when it comes. I'm not really smart enough to read the tea leaves that far ahead, so I'll just do one week at a time.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
All right, so let's wrap up here, everybody. Thanks for listening. This was a fun one. I think we're gonna have a guest again next week, so stick around. But thanks for joining, everybody, and we will see you next week. All right, bye, everybody.